Hi, my name is Muhammad or Baaf. My third culture is Kenyan, Yemeni, and Saudi. I was born in Kenya and lived my whole life in Saudi Arabia. My ethnicity is Arab and specifically from Yemen.
So, what does being a third culture kid mean to you?
So, being a third culture kid, it has a lot of benefits. You always stand out from other people, and in your environment, you feel like you always have something special, which is the different type of cultures that you pull into. Also, that shapes your character, the way you speak, the people you meet, and also how you meet them in terms of like the languages that you can talk to people with. If it's for me, I speak Swahili, Arabic, and English, and that also got me to like to learn languages. When I came to Malaysia, I tried to speak Malay and get into the culture more, to just understand them more. So I feel like being a third culture kid allowed me to have this openness in just learning more about the culture, just because me myself, I'm not from a single culture.
How do you respond to the question, where are you from? Because I know that a lot of third culture kids struggle to answer this question.
Well, yeah, I get obviously this question. Being in Malaysia, you get asked a lot where you're from and so on. So it's usually, to be honest, it depends who asks me. For example, if someone who is if it's tough to explain to someone where your ethnicity is from and so on, so I just go for like, I'm from Kenya. But usually I like to explain the whole thing, like I'm from Kenya, but originally I'm from Yemen and so on. But in general, this is how it usually looks like for example, when I'm in a cab, they come and ask me, oh, where are you from? So if I don't have the mood to explain the whole thing, I'm like, oh, I'm from Kenya. And then they come and ask me and they look at me, they're like, are you serious? Are you sure? And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm sure, obviously I am. And then they're like, but you don't look really like Kenyan. I was like, yeah, I'm originally like Arab from Yemen and so on. And then they're like, oh yeah, directly they're like, yeah, you look like Arab, more like Middle Eastern and so on. And it even gets more complicated when they start asking, like, do you often go back to your country? I'm like, no, I live in Saudi Arabia, I've never lived in my country. So yeah, it's a lot of complications, but I feel like I'm lucky that I get to ask these questions, because it opens up a conversation and you can strike more like small talks going on and so on. So it is beautiful at the end of the day. And I feel, I don't know, no offense to other people, but I feel like if you just go like, oh, I'm from this country, and it's obvious, then like, okay, then the conversation is done. But if you have like more to it, that's more beautiful. So yeah.
Right, because whenever I talk to most third culture kids, they say that they have this problem with explaining their cultural background because they think that the other person who's asking them don't actually care, so they just choose not to explain themselves.
Oh yeah, definitely. I've been put into some situations where like, oh, I'm from Kenya, and then like with people who are also like East African or African in general, and they'll be like, but you don't really look Kenyan. I'm like, yeah, I'm originally Arab and so on. Even the people who actually like, because there's a large Arab community in East Africa, yeah, but even for the people who are like, I tell them I'm from Kenya, but I lived in Saudi Arabia. Even the Arabs who lived in Kenya, they'll be like, oh yeah, but you cannot like really say that you're from there because you only lived in, like, viewed as an outsider. But to be honest, for some reason, I don't know why, I've never mentioned to someone that I am from Saudi Arabia. I usually just say that I lived my whole life there, I grew up and so on. But throughout my life, I usually say that I'm Kenyan and originally Yemeni, and also that I lived in Saudi Arabia. But it's generally nice, because as I mentioned, it opens up conversations and so on. So yeah, it's beautiful.
Do you feel like there's one culture that you associate yourself more with compared to the other cultures?
I don't really have a certain culture, because each one like really shaped me in a certain way. For example, if you like, I'm a bit of each and every one of them. So if you took, for example, Saudi Arabia is where I grew up, so most of my personality is affected from the way people there live and the culture and so on, because obviously I lived there my whole life until I came to Malaysia, sorry. So you cannot like, it's, you grew up there, even if your family is very culturally rooted to your own country and so on, but you obviously pick up there. And my father, he lived his whole life in Kenya, and he was raised and born in Kenya. So he always talks to us in like about Kenya and how we grew up there and so on. And each summer we go back. So when you go back, you feel like you're going back to home, to your own people, to your own family, to a place where you belong way more. At the same time, my mother actually was born and raised in Yemen. So she lived in Yemen her whole life. So even when I speak in Arabic with my mother, I try to speak in the Yemeni dialect, so it can be easier for us to feel that we are culturally related to Yemen more, as well as Yemen before, since 2010 and before, we usually used to go each year to visit our family and from there and so on. So it is tough to say that I belong to another culture. I guess you'll understand, because each part of me is from a certain place, as well as I cannot come and say I'm Kenyan fully, because at the end of the day, it's true, I've never lived there, so I will not be fully Kenyan or culturally identified as Kenyan until I really understand and live the whole Kenyan experience and so on. And even while I'm in Kenya, I will always be referred as an Arab who came from Yemen or so on. And so it's tough to identify myself as a certain place or from a certain place. So yeah, I feel like I'm a bit of everything, to be honest, which is nice because it's a nice mixture, I feel. So yeah, people from outside, they're so you're African Arab. I'm well, if that's what you like to mention or say, that would be great, because in my blood there's not much African in it. I have a little African blood, some Indian blood, but in general it is mostly Arab. So if you'd like to say I'm African, I'd be happy for it, but I don't know how to really base that on, or what to base it on. So at the end I would say that I'm a little bit of everything. I'm Kenyan, Yemeni, Saudi, and maybe Malaysian, because I've been here for some time usually already.
So you say that your family always tries to make sure that you're connected with your cultural background. So is there anything that you do on your own to feel connected to your culture or to the people from your country back home or your friends?
Oh yeah, definitely. As I mentioned, my family, they always try to attach us to our culture and so on. But usually, from my side, when I meet people who are from Kenya or from East Africa or from Yemen, I usually try to speak in their own dialect or languages and so on. And sometimes you cannot do much but have a little bit of pieces of something that represents your country, that will feel you more attached to it, or you identify yourself from it and so on. For example, I always wear this bracelet, it's been around 10 years with me or more. It's the Kenyan flag, and it's actually it started it's interesting because it started a lot of people started wearing it back home and so on. Even the president wore it during this campaign rally and so on. So I felt I should have it as well, sort of representing it outside and so on, and especially it's just something simple and beautiful. So yeah, and usually I love to have traditional clothing that I keep, for example, for any international traditional occasions that I have to go, because I don't want to feel one day oh, this guy doesn't have the traditional clothing just because he lived outside and so on. And I actually love it. So I actually bought here with me this. It's a Yemeni piece of clothing where we wear it in occasions and so on. So you wear it around the waist, and usually in weddings, in occasions in general, you have it, and it's a traditional thing. So whenever I'm called for a traditional ceremony or occasion, I like to wear my own traditional clothes to represent. So yeah, if it's either African or Arab, so, and this is the thing that you learn as a third culture kid as well, there are so simple similarities between the traditional clothes in the Arab region that you need to know in order to identify yourself properly, that you are from a certain place. So for you as a third culture kid, you will be able to differentiate, which is great.
So how about your friends? Are most of your friends also third culture kids, or are they mostly local when you go to a new country?
No, I would say like it's a mix of both. Maybe like because of how I am, it's easier for me to adapt with people from different types of culture. When I came to Malaysia at the beginning, I had friends from like basically whoever was around me because during university. So I had friends from India, from Sri Lanka, from Algeria, and so on. And these are friends that I've never had before, like from these countries while I was living in Saudi Arabia. Locally, yes, I made a lot of friends, and even like when I meet friends from Malaysia, I happen to have friends from Malaysian who are like Chinese, Malaysian, Indian, and also like Malay. While I'm in Saudi, like in my school, it was very diverse. Actually, we had friends from Lebanon, from Yemen itself, from all over. Like it was so my friends are mostly like mixed, which is great. Like you tend to have opportunities to experience their cultures. For example, I've been to an Indian wedding here in Malaysia. I've been to a Malay wedding here as well. So I've been to also India where my friend got married as well, and I was invited. And these things, basically, you will not be able to experience it except if you are either a third culture kid, or for example, you moved somewhere outside your country where you'll be able to invite it to such occasions. And through these occasions is when you learn a lot, like a lot about the culture. I mean, like for example, when I went to the Indian wedding in India, it was amazing. Like lots of like music, color. I mean, also back home we have a lot of music and so on, but the ideas in the middle and so on. Like I forgot the celebration. I think so. It was. I'm afraid I'm saying it wrong, but I think so. It's Sanjeet is where like basically both of them, both of the bride and groom, like their people or their side of the family, they make like a dance off, and like they sort of like make a script or behind like how they met each other and so on. So this is something amazing. Like obviously I would never experience such a thing from my Arab world where I lived and so on. And also like when I'm back in Saudi, the tradition, how is it, is like basically how the groom enters and everything in between, and the food that is served, everything is like to the specific, everything means something, and you will never know that unless you are a third culture kid. So it's beautiful. So my friends, yeah, like thank you to my friends that allowed me to experience their own culture. Oh yeah, also the open houses. Yeah, I've been to open houses like in Malaysia. Like we don't have this back in like in the Arab world or even in Kenya. So like during the Raya season or Eid, during the Eid season, also in the Chinese New Year, uh, Chinese families or Muslim families in the Eid season, they open their houses for anybody to come and so on. I mean, we also do it during Eid, but it's usually like for family and friends and so on. But here in Malaysia, they like it's open houses, so like people can enter and like neighbors and everything. So it's something like I feel like it's amazing because it it's like it makes the community more stronger and so on. So that's beautiful. And another thing that like the mixture of friends that help me also is the language, is that you tend to know like more languages, like more words from each language and so on, which makes it way more easier for you to communicate with them, to relate to their jokes, to relate to their culture and so on. So yeah.
Okay, so do you think that people who don't leave their countries or their cities ever are missing out on this experience at all?
Oh yeah, sure. Obviously, like if you live in one place or one country, like it's tough to. I mean, it depends on the country you live. Some countries are very well diverse, and it's up to you if you would love to like go out of your comfort zone and meet people from other countries. But for us, you have to, because that's all you got. Basically, you're the outsider, and you need to like to adapt to the people. So thankfully, like when I lived in Saudi Arabia, I didn't really have that problem, where because maybe I spoke the language or because I was just raised there my whole life, so it's okay. But obviously people who are outside, they live a whole different experience than the ones that we are living in. So obviously they are missing out. on certain good things, but obviously there are also bad parts where they are like there's also like good things about you living in your own country your whole life. So it depends at the end of the day.
So, are there any things that you don't like about being a third culture kid?
I mean, obviously, like for everything, there's the goods and bads, and nothing is like amazing. As I mentioned before, all the good things in terms of diversity and so on. But you usually have a problem where figuring out where home is, and that usually comes down to the family and how you were raised. I mean, my whole life, my family always let me know. My father like Kenya is where we're from, and you know, Saudi Arabia is also your home, and Yemen is also our home. So at the end, you're just in the middle where you don't know where to exactly put yourself or call at home. And also that comes down to like when someone asks you where you're from, so you don't really know. It's kind of the same answer to that. So if you come and ask me like where home is, I honestly cannot have an answer for that, because everywhere is home, and in each place you have a good memory, and you can relate to it culturally in a certain way. At the end of the day, like even if I went to Kenya and people might see me as an outsider, but you cannot deny the fact that I am Kenyan, I hold the Kenyan passport and so on. And if I went to Yemen, the same thing, you cannot deny that I'm originally from Yemen. I hold a Yemeni family name. My mother lived and was raised, born in Yemen. My grandparents also they lived in Yemen for a long time. Saudi Arabia is all I've known in my life. So yeah, so basically in terms of identity and so on, it's very tough to answer that question or mention where is home. Whereas obviously people who live the place, or they're from the place, certain place their whole life, and they lived only there, it's easy because that's what they only knew. So that's tough. So that's one thing. Another thing could be like usually the misconceptions that people have about people who live outside or abroad, the third culture kids. Example is like the social status of people who live outside. They always have this misconception that people who are outside are basically rich, or they having it well and so on. It's not necessarily the same for everybody. Like I'm not saying like we are from a family that it's like, you know, we're not having it good. No, thankfully we have it good and so on. But it didn't start that way. Like my father had to go through a lot of stuff, and obviously being his son, we had to go through it as well. And you can see like how my father struggled to give us a living and so on. However, like a simple example could be that for us that we live in Saudi Arabia, maybe we're considered like middle class or so on, but people who live, or family members who also live in Kenya, who have, for example, their own house and so on. So that's considered higher class in Kenya, or I don't know. Like I'm pretty sure it's higher class. See, as a third culture kid, you cannot really mention facts about your own country because people will be like, "Oh, you didn't live there, so how can you say that?" But I'm pretty sure a person who owns a house in Kenya is considered someone within the higher tier. So like if you come and compare, obviously income wise this is a whole different story, but if you live in Kenya and you are having a certain income that allows you to be in a very well place or a higher class, but you earn higher outside your country and you are in a lower class, so it's not the same thing. Like you basically in your own country you're living a better life and so on. So this is a misconception that I would like people to know about. And at the end of the day, I'm not here to say like, oh, we're having it bad. Not necessarily. Obviously, like it's not necessarily like, oh, when I go outside my country I will have it good. That's a very wrong misconception. You really need to work for it. The competition is very high in some countries. And true, like sometimes if you actually go back, I mean, if you won't go outside your country and work for a living and so on, you might as well end up like having a good life and so on, but definitely not as easy as you think it is. So it's a misconception that's always there. And as a third culture kid, you do not have a choice but to live with it. Usually when you go back home, people always think, oh, this guy from outside he came, he has money, and they sometimes ask you for certain things that you're like, bro, like I don't have what you're asking for. You're asking the wrong person. I'm as exactly as you. You might provide it to me well better than me providing it to you. So yeah, that's a problem. And yeah, another thing could be also like how you relate to your family. That's another topic that it's a very like problem that I don't like about third culture kids, or being a third culture kid, which is basically like from our culture, how you are seen in the family and so on depends on where you were during certain occasions. For example, if there's a funeral, which is a moment of grief, so you usually have to be there to show your support to the family, and to show your support in general. And during during the celebrations, you also have to be there, and be attending the happiness of your family, of your loved one, because it's a family occasion at the end, and you cannot be there in a family occasion. So it's tough to like understand what's happening in the family, the status of the family, who was there, and who basically who you can relate more to, and like respect, and will you ever be respected for the fact that you weren't there? Is it you considered a pass? You were just not there because you are a third culture kid and you're living abroad. So at the end of the day, it's things that you have to live with. You cannot do anything with, and like we go through it every day, like cousins getting married, family members pass away, and family members give birth to give birth, and then we cannot see their children. Like I cannot see my cousins, I cannot see my own nephew. I've never seen my nephew, like it's been a year and a half because my sister stays abroad, and it's something like you just have to live with, so you cannot do anything about it. It is sad if you live in your own country and you're surrounded by your family. Just count your blessings, honestly. I know some of you like, oh, you're lucky, you're away from your family and so on, but no, like I want to see my nephew, bro. So yeah, and I want to be there when someone is having a moment of grief or celebrate when in their weddings, but it is what it is, basically.
Do you think that you have lost connection with your family?
I mean, for you mean my family back in Kenya? If that's the case, I didn't really lose connection. I mean, like to a certain extent, obviously I'm not as close as the people who are in Kenya. That's for a fact we cannot deny about, and so on. But everybody there obviously know who else, and we were lucky because the fact that we always go there every summer and so on. I know my cousins when I go there. Like I know their family, I know them, I know but I only know the ones who are in Kenya because I have cousins everywhere around the world. Some of them I honestly do not know even their names, their children, when they got married and so on. Like it just happens, for example, one holiday you go back to Kenya and they happen to be there, or go to Yemen and they happen to be there, and you introduce yourself to your cousin and be like, oh. So yeah, in a certain extent, yes, but to the people who I know, no, I didn't lose connection. I always call them. And a good thing about it, like from my own perspective, I haven't have a problem with it, because usually when I go back, I tend to have a good it's not tough for me to like, oh, I'm the guy who you met last year or 2 years before. No, we already in sync together and we already know each other, and like, oh yeah, how is it going? It's not awkward, basically. So yeah. But my family in Saudi, since I came here, it's more tough, because actually when I came to Malaysia it was more tough, because my family is like my parents and my siblings. These are people I lived my whole life with, and I know they were there my whole life. At least my cousins, I know like these are like a month in a year or so on. But when I left Saudi Arabia, and I came to Malaysia to study, so that was a bit difficult, especially now that my sister is not there in Saudi Arabia and so on. So you don't know when you're gonna meet her, and it's very difficult and so on. So that is tough. So you just have to live with it, and you cannot do much. Losing connection in general, not really, but to a certain extent, yeah, I'm not that close. Like people, okay, so my cousins basically who live in Kenya, like who live in the same house with my grandparents and so on. Obviously these people are more closer, like they know more about my grandparents and they're closer than me. But like losing connection at all, no, I don't think so, because I speak to my grandparents and so on, and like I've always had connection. Luckily I speak the language, so there's no language barrier much, and it creates a good like vibe to it when you talk to them and so on. So yeah, and it's sometimes you might think it of as a good thing or a bad thing. Like you always have this thing where basically you know that whenever you come, you will feel welcome because they miss you and so on. So you're always pampered by them. So I mean, if you want to take it that way, yeah, sure.
So, do you have any message for people who are not third culture kids and who don't understand third culture kids?
I mean, all I can say is basically that you can take the opportunity from third culture kids, because usually third culture kids, they have so much experience living other cultures and so on. So my message is basically learn from them, and you can take the benefits from them in terms of openness, being culturally open-minded and so on, and just accepting new stuff and so on, because a lot of people say like you learn more in life when you understand other people's culture or travel and see the world and so on. So this is an opportunity for you to know more about a person, and you will know more about their culture, and yeah, and you will be more accepting, even like in life in general. If you accepted someone who you consider is foreigner, it will be easier for you to accept other things in life, which might sound a bit difficult for you in the beginning.
And do you have anything you would like to say to people who are third culture kids struggling with the same things that you struggled with growing up?
So my message obviously will be like, you just need to take the good situations or the good things out of the situation that you are in. Always have some things that make you relate to your own culture. I know most of y'all like do not speak the language, but it's always good. Like I know maybe speaking the language is tough to learn a new language and so on, but maybe you can understand your culture more, understand why your people dress this way. You need to know your culture at the end of the day. You cannot run away from being who you are, or you cannot just say I'm from this place, and you at the end of the day you don't really feel like related to it. So be proud of what you are, and stand out. You like at the end of the day you are something that not most of the people around the world are. So just enjoy whatever you're experiencing, and just know that you have something in you that other people do not have, and that thing really makes you stand out, and you understanding about your own culture and your own people will basically make you have something to talk to, and something to know about. See, this is something good about being third culture kids, okay? You really like, it's amazing because you get to know some words that are said in like, okay, I'm just gonna give an example. In Swahili, when you say goodbye, you say kwaheri, and kwaheri is like, means I will meet you in a good time, or in blessings or so on. So like goodbye is just goodbye, like it doesn't make sense. Or example, in Malay, when you say thank you, you say terima kasih, and terima kasih actually like literally translates to receive love, which is beautiful because thank you is just like thank you, but terima kasih is receive love. So everybody, like when you do something to someone, they tell you receive, like I wish you receive love. So being a third culture kid, you can understand the differences in that, and that's beautiful. مع السلامة، شكرا انكم شفتوا الفيديو هذا، واتمنى انكم تعلمتوا شيء جديد عننا.